Thank you, Allegra. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to be too late there. I think they were having some technical difficulties. I noticed that the red spot was here on the floor. I'm quite used to it as an ex-UKIP politician to see the red spots on myself more than anything else. And thank you, TEDx, for allowing me to have this discussion today amongst yourselves about why Brexit happened. Now, I'm not actually going to rehash the arguments for Brexit. I think most of you are hearing that every day by the Liberal Democrats as they put it effectively in their manifesto. I think you're hearing it every day on television. And I'm sure that many of you have argued it over the past few months yourselves. What I want to try and look at is much more deeply is why someone like myself, who was born in a council estate called Moss Side in Manchester, grew up in Withington, another council estate, of a mixed-race parentage. My grandfather is a black American, I have a Jewish grandmother, an Irish grandmother from County Kildare who came over at the age of 14 after the Second World War. You know, I have more shades, you know, in my family and it actually replicates this room. It's pretty much what a lot of Britain is becoming. I won a scholarship to a private school that was once a grammar school. I studied law at university, the first in my family. I became a barrister. From there, I moved into the City of London, eventually chairing the Hedge Fund Lawyers Association, working for some of the biggest investment banks as an advisor. Why is it that I would give up an incredibly well-paid job like that to risk myself of getting involved in politics, to actually be able to make jokes about red dots and whether people will be firing at me? And trust me, you know, sometimes people are firing at you from within your own party. Why is it I would do that? And it is because if you look at my story, of my history, my background, my family, my friends, and the people that I grew up with, and also those people that I worked with, they're going to replicate some of those issues that you have on here. Now, most people are going to talk about these issues. You know, democracy, economy, immigration, the future of the EU, trade and memberships. All of these, and many more, as subcategories of that. But I'm going to try and sum it down to three things. That is by far the most important word of all. Not far from here, in an Oxfordshire village called Burford, in 1649, and it celebrates on the 17th of May, so we're not far away from that, are for me a representation and history that is significant in the democratic growth of this country. Three people: Corporal Perkins, Private Church, and Cornet John Tompkins have a plaque on a church in Burford where they died. Now, those three men fought in the New Model Army for Cromwell in order to remove England from a king that was doing enormous damage to the vast numbers of people in our country. They believed in something, that the removal of the king could lead to things that were better for their people. And they helped Cromwell win. But they were also part of something that was amazing in this country. They were part of a movement called the Levellers, who believed that every man in the country, and it was only men at that time they believed in, that should have the vote, that there should be a parliament, that there should be trial by jury, that you should know your accuser, there should be the establishment of the rule of law. Well, those three men and the Levellers movement, what happened? They were promoting their arguments, they were writing pamphlets, but Cromwell, now that he was in power, now that he removed the king and he was de facto the king, didn't like these radical, heretical ideas. So with his own part of his army, pursued four of them to that church in Burford and demanded that they got rid of their heretical ideas of freedom and democracy and liberty. Well, 397 of those soldiers walked out of the churches and the surroundings and said no. But those three men said freedom for everybody is far more important than their own lives. So Cromwell slay them on the spot. freedom, democracy, liberty. Rolls off the tongue so easily, doesn't it? But you almost forget how it was won and who did it to achieve it. As Ronald Reagan said, freedom is not born in our bloodstream. It is something that you have to nurture, care for, and look after, and fight for. Well, in our country, we did. The Levellers, the Diggers, the Pentridge Martyrs, the Chartists, people killed in Merthyr Tydfil by our own armies simply for asking for the vote. In Manchester, where I was born, at the Peterloo Massacre, dozens of people killed, including 2 children, and hundreds slain by our own soldiers, simply for asking for the vote. And women beaten outside our own parliament, simply for asking for the vote for women. And in 1969, every man and woman aged 18 got universal suffrage. They could put a cross on that ballot paper that enabled them to choose their elected representatives who could make the decisions to improve their lives, so that someone like me, born in a council estate, could get a free education, so that I could go to university, so that I could become a lawyer just like them and stand here in a hallowed institution like this before you. So that members of my family who have sickness and ill health can be treated free by an NHS fought for by the vote. That we could have housing, not just for the few, but for the many, with social housing, simply because of that vote. And what the people who had to face this saw through the European Union was that in 1972, everything that they'd fought for was suddenly handed away. So something they was told was a trade deal, but they knew it wasn't. They knew this was a bigger project to create a country with other people making their decisions. And they did not want to be not free. But of course, the elite in this country who knew the idea, knew what the intention was to move from trade to a federation, called them stupid, little Englanders, and began to insult them. How often did I hear that through the campaign? So the British people said, we're not going to listen to you. We don't trust you. This is far more important to us than anything that's coming out of your mouths. Which leads to the second phrase, faithlessness. The British public over the years have had a trust in their institutions. They trusted academia to be able to give them the solutions to help improve their lives through better scientific and intellectual ideas that led to things that improved. And of course it did, in so many ways. We talked about mobile phones here, we talked about simple things in the home. They trusted their politicians to come up with economic ideas that improved their lives, and in so many ways, they did too. But over the past 20 years, they've seen that link between the honesty of our institutions, the media, academia, even into those involved in the world of art and drama and TV. I've been telling them lies and also saying something completely opposite to them. When they campaigned to go for the war, against the war in Iraq, they were ignored on that too. When they said that we don't want to have a country in the European Union, everyone told them no, it's not going to be that, it's just about trade. They said we'd get a vote on the Lisbon Treaty, came with the Conservative Party. They didn't get that. And then we saw them putting their hands in their pockets. So whilst they're telling us one thing, the politicians were filling their hands and their pockets with the money through expenses, and the expenses scandal. We could see the rises in wages for those at the top, whilst those at the bottom were not achieving very much. Whilst you're able to live in housing and accommodation in a beautiful city like Oxford, protected, buildings across the country that were recognised as important to them in places like Manchester were knocked down and destroyed to build horrible, horrific glass and concrete buildings. Culture was being removed and replaced to accommodate the new ideas. In this case, large-scale population rising. And so they lost faith in the politicians. And it turns out to this. As they lost faith and stopped voting, and we could see through the electorates, not just here, but also in the United States, and you could see it across Europe, people said you weren't listening to us. So why should we bother voting? It used to be 80% voted for the Conservatives and the Labour Party. Look at what it will be over this general election and the previous few. Much smaller, much more diminished. Yes, the other parties, including my old party, have risen. But one of the largest rises are those who don't vote at all. And those who didn't vote at all were significant in this referendum. How often did I knock on the door and I met somebody who grabbed me and shook my hands and said, I haven't voted for 30 years, but I'm going to stick it to them. I'm going to stick it to them in the way they've stuck it to me for the last 20 or 30 years. And why did they say they were stuck it to them? Think of the example of Gordon Brown going to Rochdale, to an area which was a Labour heartland, and meeting someone who had campaigned in Gillian Duffy for the Labour Party for years, and her family had, and her family before that. And she had seen the rise of immigration in the council estates that I grew up in the north, quite significantly. They weren't happening here in the leafy areas of Oxford. They were happening outside. They weren't happening in Hale, in Cheshire. They were happening in inner city Manchester and Bolton and Oldham. So she simply asked him a question. What are you going to do about rising immigration? Well, we all know what he did. He smiled at her, he got into the car, and then was overheard calling her a bigot. He called one of his own side a bigot for raising the question. But the political elite have done that over the past 20 years. I've been called an Oreo, a coconut, a disgrace to my race. Okay, I've faded over time, a little bit like Michael Jackson, but naturally. There's not much I can do about that. It's my genetics. But I'm a part of the human race. And the human race asks the questions of whether you're looking at people's housing and homes and schools, and you ask yourself as a politician, are you listening to them? But no. You have people like Matthew Paris writing in the Times, saying those people who are concerned about immigration or rising costs to themselves were living in Clacton, a place simply where they go to die. Or you have that horrific and disgraceful image of Bob Geldof hiring an expensive yacht on the Thames, drinking champagne, to go out and challenge the fishermen from the north who'd come down in boats, who had salaries a quarter per annum of what he cost to hire that boat, sticking two fingers at them as they were asking to leave the European Union so they can get their fishing rights back and improve their lives. The pure insults of Farron only recently, talking to some voter, saying, aren't you ashamed for your children, your grandchildren, that you voted leave? And I'm so glad that he said no, because no one takes a vote for your children without thinking about the consequences. Or Emily Thornberry, during a campaign and a by-election, tweeting a photograph of a white flag and an English flag and a white van, saying, look what you're seeing here. The imagery of the elite was that everybody who wasn't outside of their circle is thick, stupid, ignorant, don't know what they're doing, should simply do as we tell them what to do. How often have you heard that in discussions during the referendum campaign amongst yourselves? How many of you, in all honesty, have thought inside there the same, that we know all the facts and they don't? The difference is that you have wonderful opportunities, as I did, and I saw many of my friends at university doing exactly the same. A chance to get out. That's why I left. A chance to expand and see the world and meet other people and be grateful that you're part of a class of people that can do that. But you have a moral responsibility to also understand what it is like in their shoes. I used to make a joke in debating that I said, what I always like to do is, before criticizing someone, is walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. Because at least I knew that if they didn't like the criticism, first of all, I was a mile away, and secondly, I had their shoes. There's no humor when I listen to the politicians of today, who all tend to come from the same institutions. Wonderful article that was written recently about those in politics and those who were interviewing them, showed that the vast majority of them had come from Oxford and studied PPE. When you look at those who go to the Senate and Congress, how many of them have also come from Harvard or Yale or Princeton? For goodness sake, don't even start talking about France, where they only really come from one institution. Similarly, in Italy, Germany slightly better, but the same sort of idea. You get the picture. For the last 20 or 30 years, for when I was growing up and watching Parliament, where there were doctors and bin men, where there were trade unionists and lawyers, we have seen a contraction. And that is where you come in. And we're those who have to understand this fear of freedom, faithlessness, being ignored and demeaned. If you're going to understand why you lost, you have to understand why we fought hard against your elite. But that doesn't mean that everything is lost. Because one thing is absolutely clear about this country that I love so much, is that when they're talking about immigration, none of them are saying we want no immigration. They recognize that we are a country of a melting pot of 1,000 voices, from indigenous white to indigenous black, to mixed race families to mixed race cultures, from Christian to Jew to Muslim to Hindu. That might have been an issue, but they're simply asking you to understand where they are coming from. And this is where I have great hope. I have great hope that you're now beginning to understand that being left behind and ignored and demeaned is not something that you could sit there happily and undertake. You're quite happy to put your hands into your pockets and give charitable events to those across the world. You know, when you look at Bob saying, I want to feed the world, why was he not also creating charities to feed those in this country as well, when we have food banks? Think about the consequences of your actions to those people, and that is one of the great things that will happen from this Brexit. We will now start to understand once more the real reasons of why those who've been left behind from globalization are not benefiting, and you can make that change. But you can make that change by embracing the freedom that we now have. Don't allow the politicians to say we can't do it anymore because it's Europe's fault, because they're telling lies if they do. It's their fault if they don't improve the housing system. It's their fault if they don't change the electoral system to allow more people to get elected from different views. It's their fault if they can't help us in energy prices. It's their fault if they don't improve the lot of the people in our country, and it's not Europe's, and it's not the European Union. And it's their fault if they don't embrace the world by being outwardly looking, globally trading, and engaging in more positive actions with our neighbours in the Commonwealth and other countries. I rose here today because I believed in the positiveness of this country and the people around it. The wonderful people I see every day, I don't get caught in the negativity about it. As Steve Biko said, confidence is about yourself being free. I feel today I'm free because of those people in Burford who put their lives at risk so that I can stand here. For those who did in our history. And I'm free today to say to yourselves, there is a bright open world out there which we must all engage in. And I'm looking forward to it. I just hope that you're going to join me on that journey. Put away the nastiness that others are saying. Put away the darkness of some disaster that's going to occur. Because you're here, your future is ahead of you, and you are bright and confident enough to know that the future moves on, and the past is where it is, in the past. Thank you very much.